Well, welcome back to another week's analysis behind the news. As I promised last week, we're going to start a 4-week series answering some of the things that was on the Fox News reporting called Surrendering America, which primarily gave a neocon position on 4 things, which we'll discuss in a moment. It didn't take other things into account either that I think are necessary to understand these 4 items. But before we get into that, I want to remind all of our members to look when they get the email from us on Voter Voice. We get out an e-alert on Voter Voice relative to all the states that have passed a constitutional convention call to the Congress. Now, there's been a lot of things over the past week saying that with the state of Michigan, which is the 2nd state to do so this year, since my last broadcast, that brings the states up to 34, which is necessary now for the Congress to call a constitutional convention, except they do not take into account the 12 states that the John Birch Society members have gone into and had their calls rescinded. Now, that's a raging debate. You can see it on Voter Voice, but I just want to remind you there, do not become disheartened because we're winning this fight. Plan A is not working. Now they're segueing into Plan B. That won't work either if we can get enough word out to the fact that so many states have rescinded their calls, about 12 of them, to the Constitutional Convention. At any rate, I'm going to look a little bit more at notes than I normally do. Normally I just come here without rehearsal, just sit down and start talking to you. But in this case, I think it's necessary to kind of stick to a little bit of a script, if you don't mind. One of the things that happened, by the way, with this Fox News in the Surrendering of America is that it covered 4 topics, but I felt that they were inadequate in their explanation. This week, we're going to take one of them, and it's going to be examining the issue on lowering the size of the American Army to pre-World War II standards. The other 3 things is the surrender of control of the Internet, to also abandon America's space program, and also to fail in the failure of the administration to fully exploit the nation's natural energy resources to full strategic advantage. But let's take the reduction of the Army first. We can't look at this issue without considering the condition of the world that we live in today. And it would be naive to believe, for instance, that Moscow and Beijing do not have designs on expanding their influence around the world, and indeed expanding their territory, where they would actually have control and occupation of those countries. Influence is a far better way of doing things than occupation, frankly, but to deny the fact that Moscow and Beijing have these designs is that just not living in reality. Having said that, there can be no question that the United States foreign policy and our assistance to both Russia and China have helped them build their military and diplomatic capabilities. This is due to powerful American interests manifested through such organizations as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and a variety of Council on Foreign Relations-led State Department financed private organizations, foundations, and that sort of thing. And getting involved overseas in the name of the American people, being financed by the State Department and led by members of this Council on Foreign Relations, stirring the pot, creating a great deal of the problems that are happening overseas, particularly in the Middle East. Also, you have to take in the fact that our involvement in entangling alliances, particularly such as the United Nations, is also creating a real serious problem for the United States Armed Forces. Because all of these things interfering in the world stage are creating a mess into which we're sending our armed forces. Now, a lot of people have a public perception of treating these nations that we're being involved in as belligerents, when in fact they wouldn't be belligerents if we weren't messing around in their backyard, so to speak. Take an example of Thomas Jefferson. What if Thomas Jefferson, instead of sending the Navy to Tripoli, had said, we're going to invade Algeria? You see, before, we punished piracy and the terrorism of the day by going in and taking care of it in an isolated manner with a scalpel. Very simple. That's what Thomas Jefferson did. And yet today we say we're going to invade the whole country. Instead of just going into Tripoli, we're going to invade Algeria. So just instead of taking care of Al-Qaeda, we're going to invade Iraq, Afghanistan, and maybe even Iran. Now we're even talking about sending military aid to the Ukraine, that sort of thing. We overdo these things. Instead of taking a look at what the root problem is, or an isolated problem, we make a federal case out of it, so as they say, and send our armed forces all over the world. In fact, Russia and China would not be a problem today, would never have become communist if it wasn't for American individuals interfering in those countries at the very onset in 1917 and in 1949, 1950. In fact, you can lay the blame for China being communist directly at the doorstep of the United States State Department. That used to be a common thing, a common knowledge amongst conservatives in this country in the Eisenhower years. Today, that idea is completely lost out of the psyche of the American people. It was our State Department that created the very enemy that we see being built now. It was the State Department under Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon, a Republican, that opened up China to build that country into a major force to start interfering and throwing its weight around in the Pacific with the money that they get by Americans purchasing products at the major chain stores in the country. If we don't do these things, we don't have the problems that we see happening. At any rate, readers of our magazine, by the way, are kept up on these issues, and they see that these things are a real problem. Another one is that most people don't know in the area of research and development, the United States and Russia even cooperate on advanced military aircraft, fighter aircraft even. They work together on these things today. China, for instance, helps build some of the mainframes for some of the airplanes that are built in the United States. Those sorts of things where we help them on one hand and then call them an enemy on the other, so that we can get involved all over the place, ultimately leading toward a new world order. We need to have peace, so we need to go into the United Nations. All sorts of different sides to these arguments. At any rate, the way we cure this thing and reduce our army, first of all, is to stop helping these nations in the first place. Stop meddling in these nations and creating those problems that necessitate us to send our armed forces overseas, or at least they tell us that we need to. But there is one way of getting around all of this. What is the purpose of our armed forces to begin with? Is it to invade anybody that we feel like invading? Or is it to defend the American people? If it's to defend the American people, then why is it we've closed down all the army bases in the United States and building army bases overseas? The Fort Ords, for instance, of the world. We had all these army bases that now no longer exist in the United States. I propose that we go back to the system that our founders gave us, and that is state militias. I think that we can take that system, couple it with the Swiss system, where every able-bodied man has a fully automatic assault weapon in his home. He is part of the reserve defense forces, to where he trains and can be on call at any time if a nation tries to invade our country or the Swiss or what have you. You know, one of the things that this would do, it would cut down on crime tremendously. It is a fact, statistical fact. where everybody in the community has a weapon, crime goes down. There are cities across this country who have passed ordinance that every individual have a gun in their home. And crime has gone down in those communities, particularly burglary. But at any rate, there are some other side benefits to this, besides having a massive army at the ready. If every able-bodied man is trained and serves in a reserve force and has the assault weapon in his home, it cuts down on crime. It also might cut down on any thoughts of a draconian government when that government knows that its very citizens are armed to repel totalitarian regimes of any stripe. Don't forget, our country passed these Bill of Rights and had the Second Amendment not to go out and kill Bambi, but to protect itself from any government in the future that might become dictatorial. We're witnessing that now in the Obama administration. Now, this may be a radical thing to propose at this point in time, but ladies and gentlemen, let's go back to what our founding fathers gave us, get back to state militias. Have a national cadre in case we need a national initiative in the way of an army. Now, there's more to this, too much to talk about in such a short amount of time, but please take a look at it, think about it. Until next week, we'll see you then.